All right, let's turn to 8B. Explain the Missouri Compromise and the issue of slavery in western states and territories. And I want to focus right quick on in western states and territories, what we're talking about here. And then we'll return back to this Missouri Compromise. What we're essentially going to point toward is this westward expansion or territorial expansion of the colonies westward is going to intensify this sectionalism, this idea, or this north-south conflict, this north-south tension, this north opposed to the south and south opposed against the north is going to lead us to a civil war. Westward expansion is going to intensify these ideas, or there's these differences that's going to cause arguments, conflict. We know that in the Northwest Territory that slavery was outlawed, but what about this Louisiana Purchase area out here? The issue of slavery out here in the Louisiana Purchase had not been discussed. There was no interest. I mean, there was no discussion. There were, but the arguments were the North said, "Look, we want slavery out of that area. We don't want slavery to spread westward." The South says, "Yes, we do want it to spread westward because they wanted a lot of land out here to grow cotton on, and they needed their slaves to grow that cotton." To get it out of the field and all, and it's part of their economy. So the big question is, how do we deal with slavery out here in the Louisiana Purchase? How is it going to be determined if a state comes in whether it's going to be slave or whether it's going to be free? We had already decided this up in here in this area with the Northwest Territory, no slaves there. But what about in Louisiana Purchase territory or in that area? So this question arises, will slavery spread westward? Does slavery also spread into these newly acquired territories like Louisiana Purchase? This is going to spark these heated debates between the North and South and cause these tensions and the sectionalism that is eventually going to rip this country apart. So 8B, we're going to talk about Missouri Compromise, and if you could kind of predict Missouri, where is Missouri? And we see the state of Missouri is right here. It's going to be within this Louisiana Purchase area, right in here. That's where Missouri is going to be asked to come in as a state. So Missouri Compromise, we see there's a conflict about Missouri coming in, and we can predict compromise. Well, they must have settled the issue, but did they? And the issue of slavery in western states and territories we just talked about. So our main focus here on this standard is this Missouri Compromise and what it's about. This is a term you need to know, you need to be fully aware of. The EOCT, you need to be able to answer any questions concerning the Missouri Compromise. Very important. So let's look at the themes here. Westward territorial expansion, movement and migration west. That's the theme. Westward expansion of slavery. Political interactions, some conflict there. And then with the Missouri Compromise of 1820, we see the conflict and compromise. Alright, so in our series of events leading to the Civil War, in other words, North-South tensions or sectionalism events, we've covered these two already. Now we're at the Missouri Compromise, and that's what we want to focus on, is this Missouri Compromise. Now let's recall back to this Northwest Ordinance. Here's Missouri wanting to come in as a free state. A slave state. They're going to apply for a slave state to be a state. But the Northwest Ordinance we talked about, that was created in the Articles of Confederation, set up this process, established a process that territories could use to become a state. Now Missouri is in the Louisiana Territory. And this process it's going to use is when it sets up its temperate government. They had one. Then they got 5,000 free males that could vote. And they set up a territorial assembly, had a governor, 3 judges, and then they got 60,000 people eventually, and then they drafted a constitution in a convention, and then they applied for statehood. Missouri did, following the same process that was established under the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Okay, so remember this, and this is where it becomes important here. And Missouri is. Here is Missouri here. At the time, these states in purple here were free areas, and of course the Michigan Territory over here there were no states here yet. It's called the Michigan Territory, and they were not really established into statehood yet. but we know that slavery was not allowed here. And in purple, these became free states, where there was no slavery at this time. These in blue were slave states. Florida was not yet a state, it was a territory. So we have 11 slave states and we have 11 non-slave states. We have a perfect balance between these 11 non-slave states and these 11 slave states. So Missouri is going to upset this balance of slave and non-slave states. And it's going to be a balance of political power that's really in question. We're going to talk about in a moment. So this Missouri, meeting its population under the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, is going to cause sectional tensions, north-south divisions, north-south tensions, north-south arguments, sectionalism. Okay? So north-south tension is going to be increased by westward expansion and Missouri Territory applying for statehood. People in Missouri wanted to be added as a slave state. They wanted to become a slave state. That was in their constitution. At this time, the U.S. had 11 slave states, southern, and 11 free states in the northern part, and Congress had to question if it should be allowed in as a slave state. Should this become a slave state? In other words, should the Louisiana Purchase territory, or Louisiana territory here that we received in 1803, should we allow slavery there, or should we not, like we did in the Northwest Territory? In other words, the biggest question is here is, should slavery be allowed to spread westward? And that's going to be a heated argument that's going to cause the Civil War. Alright, so here we are. Missouri's want to come in. Can we come in? We want to be a slave state. If they do, it's going to set a precedent where a lot of these other areas with territories would become a slave state too, or had the potential to. So northern free states didn't like that too much, and we're going to find out why. It's a political argument as well. It's a moral one in that northern states don't like slavery, don't want it to spread. Okay, it's a cultural one in that southern states use, an economic one, use slave labor as a way of life, and they want it to spread into this Louisiana territory. Now this out here has not been developed yet as territories. We don't get Texas until 1846, and we don't get the Mexican Cession or Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo territory until 1848, and we don't get the Gadsden Purchase till 1853, and Oregon till 1846. This is in 1820, and we had just purchased Florida territory in the Adams-Onis Treaty in 1819. So we're in 1820 now. Missouri wants to come in. It's upsetting this balance here. A guy by the name of James Talmadge from New York is one of these free states up here, right here. James Talmadge stands up and gives the Talmadge Amendment, and in it he proposes that Missouri be allowed in to the nation, but that slavery be banned from Missouri and be banned from the Louisiana Territory. So southern states are going to be very upset about this, and they're going to claim that they're going to argue that Congress does not have the power to ban slavery under the United States Constitution. So this heated argument is going to arise in Congress between northern states that are free and southern states that are slave. So we have this big argument that arises between pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces. Pro-slavery means for slavery, anti means against slavery. And this, Missouri coming in as a slave state or free state would upset the balance of power in Congress. Congress, if you recall, was our legislature that was created in the Great Compromise. And if Missouri entered as a slave state, the southern slave states would have a lawmaking advantage, a majority, okay, if you will, over the northern non-slave holding states. Since there are 2 senators from each state and representation in the House of Representatives is based on population, then this creates a situation where if Missouri comes in, then it will throw off this balance of power that's in Congress. Let me see if I can give you a picture view of this. Okay, so before Missouri comes in, we have 11 slave states in the South, and then we have 11 free states in the New England northern area here, Northwest Territory. So we have a perfect balance of power within the United States Congress. You know, I want to take you back and review this real quick. Where did the United States Congress come from so you can fully understand this? You know, we talked about the Great Compromise. I think it was Unit 3 or Unit 2. Unit 2, yeah. Unit 2. So, and we talked about these arguments at the Constitutional Convention, and we talked about the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan. And the New Jersey plan wanted a unicameral with one vote per state. And Virginia said, no, we want a bicameral or two-house legislature with votes based on population in both houses. The Great Compromise was a Connecticut plan that set up what we have today, our bicameral legislature that makes the laws, the two-house legislature. And we took a little bit from both, and we made sure that both small states and large states were equally represented in our legislature, in our U.S. Congress. And we created the Senate as the upper house, and we said that each state would get 2 senators per state in the legislature called Congress, and the lower house would be based on population. And I think we looked at this and said, you know, small states were happy and large states were happy. They didn't get their way, but we had a compromise here. So we created the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives. Now these 2 chambers in this legislature we call the U.S. Congress makes laws. That's its purpose. It makes laws. And see, why would you know, this balance of power be an issue? Well, it's about making laws. So if we look back before Missouri comes in, okay, there's a perfect equal balance in the number of senators in the Senate. So neither one, I mean, it was pretty much tied off. You know, you had to do a lot of diplomacy. But anyway, if Missouri come in like it wanted to and become a slave state, it would give slave states more political power to make laws, because there would be 12 slave states and there would only be 11 free states. So what does that mean exactly when you say more political power? Well, what that means is that southern states would have 2 more senators, and they would have a lot more representatives in the House of Representatives. So in lawmaking power, that means that southern states could pass laws to guarantee the protection of slavery. And it also means that they could pass laws that would ensure the westward expansion of slavery into that Louisiana territory that we talked about in this area over here. They could ensure that it would spread westward, and they could protect it from being zoned out by these northern New England anti-slavery areas. Well, what would happen if the northern states got an advantage? What would happen if Missouri become a free state like James Talmadge wanted them to? Well, will it give them more political power over the slave states, over the southern states? Then the North would have more political power. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? How does Congress play into this? Well, what it means is, since Congress is a lawmaking body, it would mean that northern states, anti-slavery states, would have 2 more senators and a group of House of Representatives based on the population. So what that equates to is that northern states that are anti-slavery could pass laws to abolish slavery, get rid of it, end it altogether. And that they could pass laws to outlaw the westward expansion of slavery in the Louisiana Territory. Just like they did here in the Northwest Territory, they could forbid slavery out here in this Louisiana Territory. And they could say Missouri is going to be a free state, just like James Talmadge wanted them to. So here we have this divisive issue. We have north-south tensions over this political power tug-of-war, over this issue of slavery spreading into this Louisiana Territory. So we have North against South again, this ripping of the country in 2. So Missouri's application reveals arguments, deep-seated arguments, over the expansion of slavery westward. And we're going to see that it's going to reveal arguments over the morality of the ownership of slaves, and sectionalism over the slavery issue that's going to cause us to lead toward the Civil War. Thomas Cobb of Georgia expressed the Southern point of view about this Missouri deal with Talmadge, when Talmadge said, let's make it become a free state and make the Louisiana Territory free and don't allow slavery. Here's what Thomas Cobb of Georgia said: if you persist, the Union will be dissolved. You have kindled a fire which all the waters of the ocean cannot put out, which seas of blood could only extinguish. Now, how prophetic is that? You know, he's talking about this issue and how divisive it is, and he's really talking about a civil war here. He's being eloquent and he's purple in his language. That's what he's talking about. It's a country splitting apart and entering a war. And this tension between the North and South is revealed here in what Thomas Cobb says. And this is a primary source here. If you look it up, you find that you can use it in an argument to say, hey, Georgia didn't, southern states did not like the idea of slavery not spreading. So the Missouri Compromise 1820 is where the North and South had to come to this agreement so they wouldn't go to have a civil war. So what they do is they come up with this idea, one man does actually. The territory of Maine used to be part of Massachusetts. It is part of Massachusetts, excuse me. And it had applied for statehood as well. And let me show you that. Alright, so here's Missouri that wants to be slave, and here's Maine that wants to come in as a free state. So Henry Clay, a guy by the name of Henry Clay of Massachusetts, is going to look at this as an opportunity. He says what we can do is bring Missouri in as a slave state and bring Maine in as a free state. Well, what would that do? What it would do is it would balance out in the Senate and give 2 new senators to free states, 2 new senators to slave states, and balance out this political power or lawmaking law in Congress, and you would solve the issue here. That's what he wanted to do. Here's Henry Clay. Henry Clay's going to work out this compromise, and he's going to say, let's do that. Okay, he says let's bring in Missouri as a slave state, and Maine, let's bring it in as a free state. Now it's going to do a little bit more than that. He's going to come up with this 3630 line, because Henry Clay's like, well, what do we do? His nickname becomes the Great Pacificator, because he has this habit, as we go along you'll see, of resolving these conflicts that are deep-seated. They're very bitter disputes involving sectionalism, north-south tensions. He's going to settle many of these arguments between the North and South, but in 1852 he dies, and then by 1860 we're in Civil War. Anyway, he establishes this. He says, here's how we deal with it in the future in the Louisiana Territory. Okay, let's set up an agreement, agree on this at the 3630 line of latitude north. Future conflicts would be settled this way. Anything north of this line, 3630, slavery would be banned in the Louisiana Territory we're talking about. So anything north of that line, we're going to ban slavery, and everything south of that line could be slave states. So this line is really is a visual of, or picture of, sectionalism. It's a picture of the country literally being drawn into 2 separate regions, and that's not very good. So we see the splitting in the country along geographical lines of latitude. It was equivalent to drawing a line in the dirt to section lines north from south. If we look at a picture of this, here's Missouri. It comes in as a slave state, and we'll color it blue, and Maine would come in as a purple. That's the first part. It'd be free, so we balance power in Congress. That argument's over with. Now in the future, what we'll do is right here in this area right here, the Louisiana Territory, anything above this 3630 line, all this up in here had to be free states. Down here in the Arkansas Territory, that could be slave states. Alright, so for the meantime, this resolves the conflict. However, Thomas Jefferson, if we take another primary source quote from Thomas Jefferson to show you how prophetic he is, how intelligent he is, here's what he says about the Missouri Compromise. This momentous question like a fire bell in the night. And the fire bell in the night was where they lived in the community. Somebody's house caught on fire, and you hear this fire bell. You'd run and get some water out of the well in a bucket or several buckets, have your slaves do it, run to their house and throw it on the fire, try to put it out. So this momentous question, like a fire bell in the night, awakened and filled me with terror. I considered it at once as the knell of the Union. And the knell is another bell sound at night you might hear, or during the day. That a knell, a death knell, was when somebody died and you were going to had to go to their funeral, or you had to go to town to bring food to their family. A death knell indicated everyone in the community that, or bell ringing in a certain tone, said that someone had died. So he says he considers the Missouri Compromise as a death knell of the Union. It is hushed indeed for the moment. In other words, Henry Clay, settles this dispute in this compromise, and here he says it is hushed indeed for the moment, but this is a reprieve only, not a final sentence. In other words, he says it's not over with yet. A geographical line, talking about 3630, coinciding with a marked principle, this westward expansion of slavery, moral and political, once conceived and held up to the angry passions of men. He's talking about factions here. Pro-slavery faction and anti-slavery faction that George Washington warned about when he said don't join political parties. Angry passions, he says, once conceived and held up to the angry passions of men, will never be obliterated. Never. And every new irritation will mark it deeper and deeper. And we talk about, when he says every new irritation, he didn't know all these events that were coming that we talked about. And what are the irritations that we're talking about here? We're talking about all these irritations here. Okay, and if we look back further, we can see that the abolitionists were a factional cause, these people with deep passions about slavery, and that Southerners who wanted slaves had a deep passion about it. So Thomas Jefferson was very wise. He dies in 1826. Alright, so did we discuss and understand how this Missouri Compromise becomes a sectional issue? So did we explain the Missouri Compromise and how the issue of slavery in western states and the issue of slavery in western states and territories, and how this become a sectional issue? I think we have. Review this, ask questions in class. Good luck on the test.